Our story begins with a young, beautiful, and magical maiden named Ilmatar. Though powerful, she was forced to wander the earth for hundreds of years, alone. She calls out to the god of gods, Ukko, to lift her from her loneliness, but the loneliness does not cease. Impregnated by the sea and wind, Ilmatar was to carry a child in her womb for 700 years, trapped in watery solitude. The magical maiden, now mother of the ocean, witnessed the creation of land, the sun, the moon, and life. But as the centuries passed by, the child in the womb, the first man, became filled with wisdom, and by the time of his birth, he became a great bard, a man with a magical voice, a man named Wainamoinen. Let's pause for a moment. You might be surprised to hear that this mythical tale comes from the Kalevala, an epic poem from the Nordic lands, a land most famously inhabited by the Vikings. You might even wonder where Thor, Odin, or any of the other popular Viking gods are. But this story belongs to a people that are separate from the Scandinavians. They speak a language unrelated to any of their immediate neighbors. More often than not, these people have a difficult history in modern times that overshadow their rich past and cultural contributions. This is the creation myth of a people called, in their native tongue, the Suomalaiset. We, on the other hand, call them the Finnish. What's up everyone, my name is Tim and welcome back to History City. Finland is perhaps the strangest out of all the Nordic countries. Often considered quiet and overly introverted, the Finns are also known to be brave and martial in times of war. You eventually have to wonder how the Finns earned their strange reputation. And the fact that Finland transformed from a largely poor agricultural state in the beginning of the 20th century into one of the richest and most developed nations today, well, that's another curious mystery we'll dig deeper into. And I believe the best place to start with all this is the very beginning of the Finnish people. The starting point in the Finnish journey is above all things a story of migration. It began in the cold forest near the Volga River. Yes, the Finns originally came from their homeland in modern-day Central Russia and belonged to the Finno-Ugric ethnic group. But who are these Finno-Ugric peoples? Once just inhabiting the cold north, they originated from northern Eurasia and are now dispersed across the world in places like northern Europe, western Russia, the Ural Mountains, and all the way down in Hungary. And the languages that they speak are so distinct from their Germanic and Slavic neighbors that they have always been categorized outside of the Indo-European language sphere that dominates Europe. Throughout the first millennium BC, the Finns gradually migrated from the Volga to their modern home in northern Europe. These early Finns lived as several disunited tribes, like the Devastians and Karelians. While many of these tribes settled down with an agricultural lifestyle and assimilated with the locals, a distantly related group to the Finns called the Sami were pushed to the north. Surprisingly, they still exist today in the north of Scandinavia, and now they are most famous for reindeer herding and their colorful costumes. Just look at that cute hat. The disunity between the Finnish tribes continued for centuries, and tribal conflicts became a natural pastime. But while the Finns managed to assimilate the native hunter-gatherers, contact with the known world was extremely limited. And as the Finns continued clubbing each other, the bitterness between the tribes resulted in a lack of common cultural consciousness. And right across the Gulf of Bothnia, a group of people, known for their vicious exploits overseas and their piracy, were about to settle on the shores of the snowy, forested land. And the era of a dominant tribal structure in Finland came to a gradual close, with the help of a small push. A push with a somewhat Swedish flavor. During the Viking Age, Vikings from modern-day Sweden settled in parts of the Finnish coast, but the Finns didn't really take on the piratical lifestyle of their new neighbors. You there, young man! Are you ready to make a name for yourself? Join us and become rich. We will travel across the seas. We shall make our names known, and the Christians will tremble in our presence. What say you, brave adventurer? I think I'm good. The truth is that there is a lack of historical documentation of Finland prior to the arrival of the Swedish Vikings. and much of what we know of Viking-era Finland comes from what was written down by Christian priests. Speaking of religion, Finland was still firmly pagan until the 11th century, when Christianity started making inroads in the region. But the missionary work wasn't completely successful, with tribes converting and deconverting, often based on political and financial gains. But the religious conflict was no longer an internal issue, as Finland became a battleground spiritually and literally between the Catholics and the Orthodox Christians. Let's rewind a little bit. A rift between the Christian Church had been growing for quite some time between the Latin West and Greek East. Several theological disagreements and the major issue of the Pope's authority finally divided the Church in 1054, with Sweden siding with the Catholics and the Novgorodians siding with the Orthodox. But guess who's in the middle of all this? Starting in the 12th century, the Kingdom of Sweden launched several crusades into Finland in an attempt to forcefully Christianize the Finnish tribes. Although some of these crusades are now considered mythical and fabricated in order to give Sweden a better look. For over a century, Sweden and the Novgorod Republic engaged in routine warfare in a bid to capture the grand prize of Finland. The constant wars between Sweden and Novgorod eventually led to a stalemate, thus dividing Finland into two lasting spheres of influence. Western Finland, which constitutes the country of Finland today, under Swedish rule, and Eastern Finland, or Karelia, under Novgorodian rule. But throughout the peace negotiations, neither side cared about the opinions of the Finns. During the late Middle Ages, the Swedish government played a huge role in remolding Finland's entire image. Swedish colonists began settling on the coast, Swedish laws and taxes were imposed, and the once ruling Finnish chieftains were replaced by a new Swedish nobility. Throughout Swedish rule, the Finnish language was seen as an inferior peasant's language, and if anyone wanted a better chance in life, learning the Swedish tongue was almost mandatory. But the Swedish era of Finnish history was not purely dominated by foreign oppression. During the Renaissance, the Finns had increased contact with intellectual centers across Europe through their networks in seminaries and universities. And the most famous Finn of this generation is undoubtedly Mikael Agricola. Agricola was a linguist and theologian by profession, and he played an extremely important role in spreading the Lutheran faith in Finland and the creation of a Finnish writing system. In 1543, Agricola wrote the ABC Kirja, the very first book published in the Finnish language. The book includes basic Finnish grammar, the Finnish alphabet, as well as the catechism in Finnish. But Finland's luck ran out right about that point. Sweden had just recently become independent from their very own Danish overlords, and looked to expand its territory to the east, south, and basically anywhere that's not already Sweden. And throughout Sweden's wars, Finland basically functioned as Sweden's wallet and breeding ground for fresh troops. So, we have been focusing on the Western Finns for a while, but what about the Karelian cousins? Remember how the Karelians were taken over by the Novgorod Republic back in the 1300s? Well, Novgorod was in turn conquered by its much more aggressive southern neighbor, Muscovy. And by 1547, this gigantic cross-continental empire went with a new official and more familiar name. Though Karelia was slowly integrated into Russia over the years, the Finns and Sweden continued to view the Karelians as a common people, and the Swedish monarchy deeply desired this land. So in short, the Swedish-Russian rivalry only took a short century-long break. But while the Swedes and Russians bickered over who's boss over Eastern Europe, Finland bore the brunt of these Russo-Swedish wars. Border raids and skirmishes happened every now and Finland's main purpose was to serve as a buffer zone. Whenever Russian troops attempted to invade Sweden, the Finns fought and died on the front line while the Swedish nobility sipped their mead and waited in the west. As if young Finnish men being massacred on the field wasn't bad enough, the Swedish government demanded a raise in taxes. The Club War of 1596 was a Finnish peasant revolt against the abuse of Swedish nobility and the heavy taxation, and it got its name from the wooden clubs used by the rebelling peasants. But unfortunately, clubs aren't very effective against bullets. It's hard for us to imagine now, but the liberal and pacifist Sweden we're all familiar with today is nothing like its past self. Since its official adoption of the Lutheran doctrine, Sweden became a strictly Lutheran and militaristic state. From 1611 to 1721, Sweden experienced a period called the Stormaktiden. basically when Sweden turned up to 11 on its world domination mode. During the Stormaktiden, Sweden fought and won wars left, right, and center, beating the Danes and snatching bits of Norway, crushing Poland in the deluge, sniping half of the German Baltic coast, and even humiliating Mother Russia several times. And Sweden accomplished all these astounding feats with the help of the Finnish Hakapelita, a force of horse-riding Finns known for their speed and ferocity. The Hakapelita even got their name from the battle cry of Haka Pele, meaning cut them down. Very scary. But as Sweden expanded its control over richer lands like Livonia and northern Germany, Finland gradually lost its former importance. And from the late 17th to early 18th centuries, the Finnish population was practically halved from famines and further Russian occupations. For the majority of the 18th century, Sweden was almost consistently at war with their hated Russian neighbor. But unlike the previous times, this time Russia had the upper hand, expanding their borders from Eastern Europe all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and having westernized its army, Russia managed to crush the Swedish forces in the Great Northern War, and in the process securing more Finnish territory. After another failed attempt by the Swedish to recover its lost Finnish lands, many Finns began to see Russia as their future. And it was at this point in history when there was an idea for a separate and independent Finland. The Russian Tsarina Elizabeth even declared that it was her intention to create a Finnish state under Russian protection, fueling many Finns' desire to separate from the declining Sweden. But the real question here is, are the Russians willing to just give up this nice piece of real estate for the sake of the Finns? In 1809, the Russians successfully conquered all of Finland, but unlike other territories under Russian rule, Finland was granted the status of an autonomous Grand Duchy, which meant that the dependence of Finland on Russia was intrinsically tied to the Tsar. But more importantly, this was the first time in history when Finland became a political entity. During the Russian period, the Tsars allowed Finland to retain its Lutheran religion and laws, so the brutal serfdom in the rest of Russia did not exist in the Grand Duchy. The lack of an overlord imposing their culture and laws on Finland allowed Finnish art and culture to thrive and experience a golden age in the 19th century. It was during this time when Elias Lönnrot, a Finnish folklorist and philologist who collected stories from oral tradition, created the Kalevala, Finland's national epic poem. Finnish artists such as Akseli Gallen-Kallela and Helene Schjerfbeck created realist masterpieces depicting ordinary life of the Finns as well as scenes from Finnish mythology. Compared to the last few centuries under Swedish rule, the 19th century was a period of relative peace and prosperity for Finland. The population greatly increased and the economy slowly recovered from the previous wars. By 1812, the traditional Finnish capital of Turku was replaced by Helsinki, and the monuments and buildings of the 19th century turned Helsinki into a prominent European city. But Finland as a political entity was only less than 50 years old, and the state's identity was not that well defined. Is Finland a Swedish cultured country with a Finnish-speaking population? Is it a Russian puppet state destined to be swallowed by the larger empire in the coming future? Or is it something entirely new? In 1850, Finland faced one of its biggest internal challenges, the language problem. When Finland was ceded to Russia back in 1809, the Russian government allowed Finland to maintain its original legal system and institutions, which, if you recall, are almost entirely Swedish. Since the Grand Duchy of Finland was mainly controlled by Swedish-speaking elites, the Swedish language was the sole legal language within the government. This was an issue since the vast majority of the population could only speak Finnish. Unwilling to be under further Swedish influence, a group of nationalists called the Fennoman movement were dedicated to transforming Finnish into the nation's official language and formed various linguistic societies to promote their aims. While Swedish never lost its official status in Finland, the Fennomans managed to pressure the Russian government to accept Finnish as an equal official language of the country in 1863. But unlike the previous Russian Tsars, Nicholas II didn't like seeing Finland as fundamentally separate from the empire, and ignoring the Finnish government began a process known as Russification. So, what is Russification? Basically, when nationalities such as the Ukrainians, Poles, Belarusians, Latvians, Lithuanians, and countless other groups became part of the Russian Empire, the government would try and assimilate all these peoples into the dominant Russian culture. They'll need to start learning Russian, start dressing like Russians, replacing their own cultural practices with Russian ones. And once that process is complete, they become Russian. In 1900, Tsar Nicholas demanded that Russian become the third official language, ordered the Finnish army to disband, and placed the Russian nationalist general Nikolai Bobrikov as the Governor General of Finland. This was seen as completely outrageous to many Finns. Nicholas's decision to strong-arm the Finns into submission only backfired, with supporters of the constitutionalists of the Finnish political system refusing service in the Russian military. Coupled with disobedience against the Tsar and the assassination of Governor General Bobrikov, Nicholas gave in to the rebellious Finns. But by the beginning of the 20th century, the conflict within the Finnish Diet wasn't just between the compliers and the constitutionalists. The entrance of the Labour Party, later renaming itself as the Social Democratic Party, introduced a new Marxist element in Finnish politics. Yet, the internal strife within Finland did not stop the nation's drive towards full independence. The combination of military losses in World War I, internal rebellion, an unpopular emperor, and a creepy-looking bald dictator toppled the Imperial Russian regime. With the new communists in power, the Russian imperial system was abolished, and since Finland's connection to Russia was primarily linked to the Tsar, that link is now broken. In 1917, with the Soviets' decision to back out of the war and relinquish its western territories, Finland became just one of the many nations to secede from Russian control. And on December 6, 1917, Finland declared its independence. The rift in Finland's political atmosphere between the conservatives and left-wing movements paralyzed the government, and with radically different visions for the future of Finland, the two factions began full militarization. In just 1 month into independence, Finland entered into civil war. The socialist Reds occupied the capital Helsinki and much of the industrialized south, while the conservative Whites held the rural and agricultural parts of the country in the north. And this is the part in Finnish history where the nation's most monumental figure appears. Although views on his legacy are divided, nonetheless, this man had a truly illustrious career. He was a polyglot that spoke multiple languages ranging from Polish to Chinese, was extremely capable in the theater of war, and most importantly, successfully defended Finland in the toughest of times. Carl Gustaf Mannerheim was born in the tiny town of Eskainen in southern Finland on June 4, 1867. Belonging to a noble family of Swedish ancestry, Mannerheim received a standard aristocratic military education and went on to serve in the Imperial Russian military. But he wasn't just your everyday officer. Traveling across Central Asia to far eastern Siberia, Mannerheim had extensive espionage experience in China and served with distinction during the Russo-Japanese War. By 1914, he was even sent to the front line against the Austro-Hungarian forces. But even his military skills could not stop the deteriorating empire from breaking apart from within. Returning to Finland during the last days of the empire, Mannerheim returned just in time to witness the beginning of civil war in his homeland. And being a staunch conservative and monarchist, he led the White forces in the brutal 4-month-long conflict. Finnish society was torn to shreds during the first few months of 1918, and atrocities were committed by both sides. The Reds executed influential conservative civilians, intellectuals, priests, and moderate socialists, while the Whites became notorious for the prison camps, where prisoners of war received inhumane treatment and where many died from malnutrition and disease. By May 1918, the Reds were defeated. Prominent Finnish socialists escaped to the neighboring Soviet Union, and Finland finally caught a sigh of relief. Although there were plans by monarchists and their German allies to install a prince on the Finnish throne, Germany's defeat by the Allies and their new American friend put a complete stop to that plan, and Finland officially became a democratic republic. But the newfound democracy did not equal prosperity. The Soviet transformation of Russia into a communist state cut off trade with Finland. The loss of the nation's biggest trade partner only added to the burden of Finland's agricultural-based economy and its low level of industrialization, making Finland somewhat impoverished compared to its Western neighbors. Yet, Finland had an ace up its sleeve. With the world entering into global depression in the 1930s, markets for non-essential goods declined at a devastating rate. But even with the global economy in crisis, there is still one essential item everyone needs: paper. Not exactly the first time. This gave a new opportunity for Finland, since everyone knows paper is made from wood, and wood comes from trees, and Finland has trees, lots of it. With the country basically covered with forests, Finland's timber exporting business led to a massive economic growth, and in the ensuing decade, the Finnish economy caught up with the rest of Scandinavia and much of the West. Throughout the 1930s, Finland's population grew at an increasing speed. The economy was relatively unscathed by the Great Depression. More moved to large urban centers, and most importantly, there was peace. But the looming threat of the expanding Soviet Union was ever near, and many Central European states, including Finland, were aware of this danger. An attempt was even made between Poland, Finland, and several Baltic states to form a barrier against the Russians. But nonetheless, all these attempts failed. Finland also faced the major issue of the Karelian question. Prominent Finns advocated the annexation of Karelia as rightful Finnish territory, and that its return from Russian control was a national priority. Peace was therefore no longer an option, and as the Finns and Soviets began arming themselves for a new round of border skirmishes, the rest of Europe could not care less, not because they were not afraid of Soviet aggression, but because the international community is preparing for another global conflict, maybe something like a World War II. But that sweet, sweet peace of the interwar period did not last. In 1939, the Soviets launched a successful invasion into Poland. The Soviets knew a larger war loomed close, and demanded the Finns cede part of the strategically important Karelian Isthmus to protect Leningrad. With Finland rejecting the Soviets' proposal, the Soviet Union declared war on Finland in November 1939. Many expected the war to be a disaster. The overwhelming Soviet numbers were expected to crush the Finns. But that was not the case. Why? Well, there were several reasons. One reason was the purges within the Soviet Red Army. With Stalin's paranoid elimination of many top Soviet officers, much of the Soviet forces became disorganized and undisciplined. Another reason was the Finns' familiarity with their ice-cold and forested climate, which gave a very appropriate name for this conflict. Finland managed to hold a defensive against the Soviet land forces and saw the return of Mannerheim as wartime leader. And one figure that must be mentioned in the Winter War is of course the legendary Simo Häyhä. Häyhä served as a sniper during the war, and during his time in service, the Soviets called him the White Death. Why? Well, viewers, don't let that innocent smile fool you. This man killed approximately 500 enemy troops on his own. The Soviet command would organize specific missions just to eliminate Häyhä, to no avail. Very impressive, Mr. Häyhä. But as heroic as Finland's resistance was, it was unable to hold back the massive Soviet offensive. Finland was forced to cede around 10% of its territory, including heavily industrialized areas in the south and the important city of Viipuri, devastating the Finnish economy. And in 1 year's time, Finland got its chance at revenge. World War II entered into its most barbaric phase in the European theater, the Eastern Front. The non-aggression pact between the Germans and Soviets was broken by the Nazis in 1941, and Operation Barbarossa saw massive success for the advancing German forces. Sensing Soviet weakness, Finland saw an opportunity to retake its lost territories with German assistance. But at this point, I have to clarify, Finland was not a fascist state. Unlike Germany's other allies, Finland remained a genuinely democratic republic during the war, and did not involve itself in Germany's racial policies. Just like before, Finland saw some initial victories and advanced all the way to Leningrad, but we all know how things ended. With Germany losing ground on all fronts, in 1944, Finland switched sides. See, Italy? It's not only you. And by the end of the war, Finland was forced to cede even more land to the victorious Soviet Union. The Soviets demanded many restrictions for the Finns after the war. For one, they were not allowed to receive financial aid from the Marshall Plan. They were not allowed to join NATO. And worst of all, they had to pay an immense amount of war reparations to who else but the Soviets. But Finland did manage to pay the reparations. The USSR even became one of Finland's most important trading partners, pursuing the path of fuller integration with fellow Europeans. By the 1950s, Finland joined the Nordic Council, the European in 1995, and eventually the Eurozone in 1999. For the latter half of the 20th century, Finland's story was marked by a slow economic recovery and the dominance of centrist and moderate politics, with the Social Democrats and agrarians holding the most power. At the same time, Finland is consistently ranked among the most developed and wealthiest countries in the world. And while it is kind of questionable, it is a fact that Finland has been ranked first in the World Happiness Report for 2 consecutive years. So, what's next for Finland? How will it deal with its aging workforce? Will Finland find the perfect balance between its relations with the EU and Russia? Can Finland sustain its welfare model with ever-changing demographics? Will Finland crush Sweden in the next Ice Hockey World Championship? All very difficult questions. But the nation of Finland is truly one of a kind. It does not back down when faced with overwhelming obstacles. It is known for its hardworking and down-to-earth nature. It enjoys the absence of noise and cozy lakes. And most of all, it has the friendship and support of its Nordic friends. While Finland moves towards an uncertain future, it is time for us to end our journey here. And last of all, I want to thank you all for your support. If it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't have the motivation to make these history and geography videos. So I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I will see you all next time.